Hello and welcome to the Awareness Factory, the place where we look critically at what is going on in the world. And man oh man, the news are coming fast and thick. It's really hard to keep up with what is going on in the world right now. And I let you decide for yourself, but I'm gonna show you 5 recent news pieces from the last weeks from the English-speaking world, the UK, Ireland, US. In my opinion, what those all have in common, but as I said, decide for yourself, is they are highly disturbing. They seem to all be going into a very worrying direction, namely that of a dictatorship, of a totalitarian regime, of a fascist dictatorship where we people apparently need to be regulated in every aspect of our lives because we are incapable of behaving properly. So let's not waste any more time with introductions. Let's dive right into it and see what those news pieces are about. I recommend that you stay until the end because all of them are quite interesting. Before I get into the first news piece though, please help us keep this channel ad-free. I want to keep this absolutely ad-free. I don't want to monetize this channel. I hate ads on videos, and for that we need your help. We need that you support us either via Patreon or via the PayPal link in the description box below. For the price of one Starbucks coffee, you can become a Patreon for the whole month and support our work. This whole presentations, they take a lot of research work and then the producing of it. So please be so kind and support this channel. Also, of course, by liking, sharing, subscribing, all the other good stuff. And you can also find us, of course, on non-censored platforms such as BitChute and Library TV. Links in the description box below. All right then. The first news piece is that the California Department of Public Health has released a guidance that regulates gatherings. And there are some really interesting things in there. First, when it comes to attendance, they say that gatherings that include more than 3 households are prohibited. And this includes everyone present, including hosts and guests, because remember, they tell you also, the smaller the number of people, the safer. Also, keep the households that you interact with stable over time. By spending time with the same people, risk of transmission is reduced. Participating in multiple gatherings with different households or groups is strongly discouraged. Well, right now it's discouraged. I'm pretty sure if it continues in this direction, they're gonna be prohibited and not only discouraged. But notice the language. They treat you like a child. This is like, oh, you need to understand that the less people, the safer. Yeah, as if we are not able of thinking for ourselves. All right, then they go on to say the host should collect names of all attendees and contact information in case contact tracing is needed later. Well, that's fun, isn't it? So you're having a gathering with your friends and you need to collect the names and the contact information of each one of them. I'm sure they're gonna like that. A gathering of no more than 3 households is permitted in a public park or other outdoor space, even if unrelated gatherings of other groups up to 3 households are also occurring in the same park or other outdoor space. If multiple such gatherings are occurring, mixing between groups is not allowed. Additionally, multiple gatherings of 3 households can not be jointly organized or coordinated to occur in the same public park or other outdoor space at the same time. These would constitute a gathering exceeding the permitted household limits. And of course, you need to practice physical distancing and hand hygiene at gatherings. for any gatherings permitted under this guidance, the space must be large enough so that everyone at a gathering can maintain at least a 6-foot physical distance from others, not including their own household, at all times. Hey, this sounds like a fun gathering where you are 6 feet away from everybody. And seating must also be provided, must provide at least 6 feet of distance in all directions, front to front, front to back, and side to side between the different households. Yeah, this sounds also like a lot of good socializing. And I think you need to develop quite a loud voice to make yourself understood, also over 6 feet of distance. Everyone at a gathering should frequently wash their hands with soap and water or use a hand sanitizer if soap and water are not available. And shared items should be minimized during a gathering. Food and beverage should be served by a person who washes or sanitizes their hands frequently and who must wear a face covering, of course. Self-serve items from communal containers should be also minimized. And also, just to make yourself even more popular at your gathering, remind all persons, because they are stupid, they cannot figure it out for themselves, to sanitize hands before eating or drinking and after touching shared items, if shared items are unavoidable. And they also go on to talk about, of course, that you need to wear a face covering at all times, and when you take it down to eat or drink, you should maintain the physical distance of about 6 feet all around you. I'm going to post, by the way, the whole document in the description box below if you want to go through all of it. But it goes on with even more interesting regulation. Here is my favorite part of the whole regulation document. Number 8 is singing, chanting, shouting, cheering, and similar activities are strongly discouraged at outdoor gatherings and prohibited at indoor gatherings. Yeah, no fun for you. So, paragraph A says singing, chanting, shouting, cheering, and physical exertion and similar activities significantly increase the risk of COVID-19 transmission because these activities increase the release of respiratory droplets and fine aerosols into the air. Citation needed. Where is a good study that has proven this to be true? But hey, because of this, they need to explain it to you because you cannot figure it out for yourself. Singing, chanting, and shouting, as well as cheering and similar activities are strongly discouraged in outdoor settings. But if they occur, the following rules and recommendations apply. Number 1. All people who are singing, chanting, shouting, cheering, or engaging in similar activities should wear a face covering at all times while engaging in those activities, including anyone who is leading a song, chant, or cheer. Because these activities pose a very high risk of COVID transmission, face coverings are of course also essential to reduce the spread of respiratory droplets and fine aerosols. Well, I'm going to do an extra presentation. We did already one called Unmasked, which went into the scientific evidence for face coverings, for face masks. And even the WHO does not recommend face mask wearing for the general public because there is no scientific evidence for its effectiveness. And just recently, the biggest study in the world on this subject was finally published, and I'm gonna do an extra presentation of that, so stay tuned for that. And we're gonna clear this misconception out once and for all, I hope. Okay, so people, number 2, who are singing, shouting, chanting, cheering, or exercising are also strongly encouraged to maintain physical distancing beyond 6 feet to further reduce risk. And people, number 3, who are singing or chanting are strongly encouraged to do so quietly, at or below the volume of a normal speaking voice. Yeah, because that's how chanting and singing is the most fun, when you do it in a quiet voice, because loud voice apparently spreads the virus more. Under B, they go on to say that instrumental music is allowed outdoors, thank you very much, but only as long as the musicians maintain at least 6 foot physical distancing, and musicians must also be from one of the 3 households. So if you want to meet with some friends from other households to play music together, nope. Playing also of wind instruments, which is again explanation for you if you don't know what a wind instrument is. Any instrument played by the mouth, such as a trumpet or a clarinet. Thank you very much, California Department of Health. I didn't know that before you explained it here. Or playing of wind instruments anyhow is strongly discouraged, and if played, should use protective or tightly woven cloth barriers on the instrument bells or at the end of the instrument to protect from spread of condensation droplets. Do you have any studies on this? Again, guess not. If music is played, it is recommended that the volume be quiet enough that attendees can speak in a normal voice without shouting. Yeah, because shouting spreads the virus more, makes sense. And under C, they say, this is even more interesting, singing, chanting, shouting, cheering, and playing of wind instruments and similar activities are not permitted in indoor gatherings. So yeah, indoors, you're not allowed to sing, not allowed to chant, not allowed to shout, not allowed to cheer even, or play an instrument, a wind instrument, excuse me, to be precise. That sounds like a lot of fun. I always wanted the government to tell me what I'm allowed or not to do in my own 4 walls. Thank you very much, California Department of Health, for this. Another very worrying news piece, this time from Ireland, because worshipping, holding a mass, is also not allowed anymore in Ireland. Under new, this is from an article by the Iona Institute. The title of the article is Clergy who hold acts of public worship can go to prison under new COVID measures. And it reads, under new COVID restrictions passed into law last night in the day, a priest can now be fined or imprisoned or both for saying mass in public. The same applies to any minister of religion who holds a public act of worship. This is drastic, draconian, and unacceptable and must raise questions about the constitutionality of the measure, quite apart from its total disproportionality. I would agree with that. And then, of course, they went on to ask some politicians about it, and politicians said, no, 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 no. This is not true. Worshipping is not, cannot get you into prison, and you cannot get fined for worshipping. But the law says differently. Last night, new regulations SI 448 of 2020 became law. Article 8 of these regulations prohibits various events broadly defined. The term includes religious services with an exception for funerals. Contravention of the prohibition is an offense, and a relevant part of the regulations is a penal provision allowing for the imposition of criminal penalties on the organizer of an event, so the priest who holds a mass, such as a priest, they go on to say, celebrating a mass attended by any members of the public. And the penalties include a fine, imprisonment, or both. So you can get imprisoned in the worst case scenario for holding a mass. No more worshipping for you in public spaces together with your friends with your preferred priest. And it's really funny because the Irish Constitution guarantees, quote, freedom of conscience and the free profession and practice of religion, and they are subject to public order and morality guaranteed to every citizen. It also acknowledges the importance of public worship. Is the new law justified by public order and morality? Not if, as appears to be the case, Minister Donnelly does not have any evidence to say that public worship poses a serious health risk. Recently, when pressed about this, Dr. Ronan Glynn, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, could not point to any such evidence. Yeah, I wonder why. Maybe because there is no such evidence. So there you go. Another part of your freedom taken away in Ireland. No more worshipping. The next worrying news piece is from New York. Because the New York State Bar Association, one of the biggest bar associations in the country, passed mandatory COVID vaccination recommendation. And this is from the article in the New York Times in the law section. The resolution does contain conditions limiting its scope. Oh, I'm glad about that. And those include that the state government should only consider making vaccinations mandatory if voluntary vaccinations fall short of producing needed level of population immunity. That an assessment of the health threat to various communities be made so that perhaps the mandate can be targeted, and that a mandate only be considered after there is expert consensus about a vaccine's safety and efficacy. And we know how this goes with the expert consensus. And the article reads here clearly that the New York State Bar Association on Saturday, so this was published on November the 7th, passed a resolution urging the state to consider making it mandatory for all New Yorkers to undergo COVID vaccination when a vaccine becomes available. And this is the interesting part, even if people object to it for religious, philosophical, or personal reasons. Only medical exceptions, otherwise mandatory. This is what they recommend to the state. And it's really strange to me that law experts would recommend such measures, because when we look at the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, Title 21 of this CFR states that Americans must give their written consent to any medical treatment such as vaccination. According to Title 21 of the CFR, informed consent requires candidates for vaccination to be given the right to refuse vaccination, have the right to confidentiality, privacy, and that their vaccination data will not be shared with other parties without their consent, and they have also the right to know if there are any alternatives to vaccination. And I'm pretty sure those law experts from the New York State Bar Association are familiar with this Code of Federal Regulations, and still they push for mandatory vaccination, which goes against the law. Mary Holland, the General Counsel for the Children's Health Defense, commented on this, quote, "At the end of the day, this prominent lawyers group endorsed medical coercion for an experimental medical intervention which has been anathema in a free society since World War II. And even more worryingly, the document also proposed a, quote, State Emergency Health Powers Act to address the gaps in existing laws in New York, drawing upon the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, or MSEHPA, which was drafted in 2001. And this MSEPA document, or the Powers Act, supports the authorization of emergency powers such as rationing, the appropriation and destruction of property by public health authorities, and the control of transportation routes. For example, the document proposes giving public health officials the authority to, quote, control or limit ingress and egress to and from any stricken or threatened public area, the movement of persons within the area, and the occupancy of premises therein, if such action is reasonable and necessary to respond to the public health emergency. It also states, quote, to prevent the spread of contagious or possibly contagious disease, the public health authority may isolate or quarantine pursuant to Section 604, persons who are unable or unwilling for health reasons, religion, or conscience to undergo vaccination pursuant to this section. Yeah, the New York State Bar Association pushes for that as well. The next two news pieces, the last ones, are about the vaccine that is now apparently very, very close to being approved and introduced, and it's gonna save us all, of course. Funnily though, enough, the UK government has recently posted a bid and an award contract notice that I'm also gonna link in the description box below, seeking an artificial intelligence system that can process the expected flood of COVID vaccine injuries and side effects. Isn't that funny? Quote from the tender: the MHRA, so the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK, urgently seeks an artificial intelligence software tool to process the expected high volume of COVID vaccine adverse drug reactions, or ADRs for short, and ensure that no details from the ADR's reaction text are missed. End quote. The tender also states, quote, if the MHRA does not implement the AI tool, the MHRA says that it will be, quote, unable to process these ADRs effectively. And this will hinder its ability to rapidly identify any potential safety issues with the vaccine and represents a direct threat to patient life and public health. So they are expecting, in their own words, a very high volume of vaccine adverse drug reactions, and they need a software system to track them all, and they don't have it yet, so that's why the tender is for. So we know now that even the UK's MHRA realizes that these vaccines are going to be extremely dangerous to the public, and they will generate a catastrophic wave of adverse reactions and deadly side effects. Think about that. And this last news piece will be, I hope, motivation for you as well to move over to uncensored platforms such as BitChute and Library TV. Links, as I said, to our channel in the description box below, because there is an anti-vaccine censorship campaign going on. So, the national security states of the US and the UK have discreetly let it be known that the cyber tools and online tactics previously designed for use in the post-9/11 so-called war on terror are now being repurposed for use against information sources promoting, quote, vaccine hesitancy and information related to COVID that runs counter to their state narratives. A new cyber offensive was launched on Monday by the UK's Signal Intelligence Agency, the Government Communications Headquarters, or the GCHQ, which seeks to target websites that publish content deemed to be quote-unquote propaganda that raises concerns regarding state-sponsored COVID vaccine development and the multinational pharmaceutical corporations involved. Similar efforts are underway in the US, with the US military recently funding a CIA-backed firm staffed with former counterterrorism officials who were behind the occupation of Iraq and the rise of the so-called Islamic State to develop an artificial intelligence algorithm aimed specifically at new websites promoting quote-unquote suspected disinformation related to the COVID crisis and a US military-led COVID vaccination effort known as Operation Warp Speed. And both countries are preparing to silence independent journalists who raise legitimate concerns over the pharmaceutical industry corruption or the extreme secrecy, for example, surrounding the state-sponsored vaccination efforts. On Monday, there was an article about that in the UK newspaper The Times, and it reported that the UK's GCHQ quote, has begun an offensive cyber operation to disrupt anti-vaccine propaganda being spread by hostile states. So yeah, it's not against independent journalists, of course. It's against propaganda from Russia and from China. And the article goes on to say that, quote, it is using a toolkit developed to tackle disinformation and recruitment material peddled by Islamic State to do so. In addition, the UK government has ordered a British military's 77th Brigade, which specializes in information warfare, to launch an online campaign to counter so-called deceptive narratives about the COVID vaccine candidates. This newly announced GCHQ cyber war will not only take down anti-vaccine propaganda, as they call it, but will also seek to, quote, disrupt the operations of the cyber actors responsible for it, including encrypting their data so they cannot access it and blocking their communications with each other. The effort will also involve GCHQ reaching out to other countries in the Five Eyes Alliance, so the US, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, to alert their partner agency in those countries to target such quote-unquote propaganda sites hosted within their borders. So yeah, straight out of their own mouths, of the horse's mouth, so to speak. Censorship for all of those who question critically what is going on in the world right now. If that is not the sign of a dictatorship, of a tyranny, I don't know what is. With all that being said, I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. If you did so, as I said, please support our work by liking, sharing and subscribing. Also hit the notification button and consider becoming a Patreon or making a small PayPal donation. It really helps us out a lot. And as mentioned, follow us on uncensored platforms, because you never know how long we're still gonna be able to publish such critical thinking articles and presentations here on YouTube, unfortunately. Until next time, stay aware and think critically for yourself.